My daughter-in-law told me not to come until Sunday. She said if I showed up before then, she'd have my things put out on the curb and she'd change the locks. Those were her exact words. I remember because I read that message 3 times standing in my kitchen, trying to understand how it had come to this. Some background. My son Philip married Loretta 6 years ago. I didn't have a bad feeling about her at first. She was organized, sharp, the kind of woman who always had a plan. Philip seemed happy. They had 2 kids together, my grandson Danny, who just turned 8, and my granddaughter Lily, who's 6. From my first marriage, Philip has a half sister, my daughter from a relationship that ended badly, a girl named Abby who's 32 now and lives 2 states away. I mention Abby because she matters later. After Philip and Loretta married, things shifted slowly. So slowly I almost didn't notice. Loretta started managing the visits. I couldn't just call Philip directly anymore. She'd answer his phone, tell me he was busy. She'd have him call me back. He never called back the same day, sometimes not the same week. When I did see the grandkids, it was always at their house, always with Loretta in the room, always for exactly as long as she decided. I told myself this was just how young families operated now. I told myself I was old fashioned. I had a neighbor, Frank, who said his daughter in law was the same way, and eventually it smoothed out. I believed that. Then Philip's dad, my ex husband Roger, passed away 2 winters ago, left some money. Not a fortune, but real money. A life insurance payout and the proceeds from selling his house in Pennsylvania. The total came out to around $340,000 split between Philip and his brother Garrett. Philip's share was just over $170,000. Within 4 months of that money arriving, Loretta had convinced Philip to put it toward a house. The house they bought is in a neighborhood about 40 minutes from me. Nice house. Big yard. I was glad for them at first. Then I realized the distance was part of the appeal. Not for Philip, I don't think, but for her. Distance gave her more control over when I showed up and when I didn't. Last fall, something changed. Danny started going quiet on me. That boy used to talk my ear off. He'd come in his own sometimes, just to tell me about a video game or a kid at school or something he'd seen on TV. Then around September, the call stopped. When I asked Philip why, he said Danny was just going through a phase. Loretta, in the background, said kids get busy. Lily I hadn't seen in person since the summer barbecue. That was in July. By the time Loretta sent me that message about Sunday, it was mid-February. I want to be honest here. I'm 63 years old. I raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my first marriage fell apart. I know what it is to be tired, to be overwhelmed, to need space. I have tried every year of my retirement not to be the overbearing grandparent. I bring gifts on birthdays, but I don't overstay. I offer to help, but I don't push. I thought I had a decent relationship with Loretta. Not warm, but decent. The message came on a Thursday evening. She said she needed me to come Sunday to collect the things I'd left in their garage. A box of Christmas decorations I'd stored there, some tools I'd lent Philip, a folding table I used at family events. She said if I didn't come Sunday specifically, she'd leave everything on the curb, and if it rained, that was on me. She said she needed the garage space and she was done waiting on me to organize my own belongings. I hadn't known there was a timeline. Philip had never mentioned one. I texted Philip directly. He didn't respond for 6 hours, and when he did, all he said was, "She already told you. Sunday works best." That was the whole message. No greeting, no please, just that. I sat with it. I felt something I can only describe as a wrongness. Not about the box or the tools or the folding table, about the way Philip wrote back. That wasn't how he talked to me. Even when things were strained between us, he had a way of softening things, of putting a little warmth in even a short message. That message had nothing. I decided to go Saturday, late afternoon when I thought Loretta would be out. She had a standing thing on Saturday evenings, a dinner with her sister and the sister's husband. She'd mentioned it before. My plan was to get there around 5, grab my stuff from the garage, and be gone before anyone had to deal with me. I know that sounds sneaky. I'm not trying to make myself sound better than I was. The truth is, I wanted to see the house. Something was pulling me toward it, and I couldn't name the feeling. Just like I couldn't name the wrongness in Philip's text. I pulled up around 5:15. Loretta's car was gone, which was what I expected. Philip's truck was in the driveway. All the lights were on downstairs. I could hear the TV from outside. I knocked. Philip opened the door, and his face went through several things very quickly. Surprise first, then something I'd call calculation, then something that looked like guilt. He said I wasn't supposed to come until Sunday. I told him I knew that I just wanted to grab my things from the garage so I'd be out of everyone's hair. He said the garage was a mess and I should really wait. I said I didn't mind a mess. He let me in. I don't know why he did, looking back. Maybe he was tired. Maybe some part of him wanted what happened next to happen. The house was warm. Danny was on the couch in the living room watching something on Netflix. He looked up at me, and his face, I want to say his face lit up, because that's how it used to be. But this time there was something else mixed in. Relief, maybe. A kind of desperation disguised as joy. He jumped up and hugged me harder than he usually did, buried his face in my shoulder for a second longer than usual. He's 8 years old. 8-year-old boys don't typically cling. I said, "Hey, buddy, where's your sister?" He let go of me and looked at Philip. Philip looked at the floor. Then Danny said, "She's resting. I've been around children long enough to know when a child has been coached on what to say." That word, resting, didn't come from an 8-year-old. That came from a parent. I said, "Resting where?" Philip said she'd had a tough week. She was tired. She was in her room. I said I'd just poke my head in and say hello. Philip moved between me and the stairs in a way that looked almost casual, like he was just shifting his weight, but it wasn't casual, like he was just shifting his weight, but it wasn't casual. He said she was sleeping and I shouldn't wake her. Something cold moved through me. I asked if Lily was all right. Philip said she was fine. I asked when she'd last been to school. He said she'd been home with a cold. She was getting better. I said I was glad to hear it. Then I said I needed to use the bathroom. He pointed me toward the one off the kitchen. I went, closed the door, ran the water, and I stood there in that bathroom for about 2 minutes just listening to the house. Above me I heard nothing. Not a sound from upstairs. No TV. No movement. For a 6-year-old who was just resting, that was a lot of stillness. I came out of the bathroom and walked toward the garage door in the kitchen. Philip followed me, and I said, "Don't worry. I'll just grab my box and I'll get out of your way." He relaxed a little. The garage was attached to the house, and you could get to it through a door off the kitchen pantry. He stayed in the kitchen while I went to the garage. I found my box of Christmas decorations near the door, and next to it my folding table. I was picking up the box when I heard it. It came from the interior wall of the garage. A small sound, like someone shifting weight. Then a cough. Small, controlled, like someone trying very hard not to cough loudly. I put the box down. I stood very still and I listened. The sound came from the wall that separated the garage from a room I knew was a storage room, a small room Loretta had always kept locked. Always said it was for household supplies, insurance documents, things like that. A room I had never been inside. I walked toward the wall. The door to the storage room was there, on the inside of the garage. It had a padlock on it, the kind you buy at a hardware store. The lock was closed. I knocked on the door. Silence. I knocked again and I said, "Lily, it's Grandpa. Honey, I'm here." A pause. And then, from behind the door, so quiet I almost didn't catch it, "Grandpa." My hands went numb. She said it again. "Grandpa, it's cold. I've been in here a long time. I need to tell you that the next few minutes are not something I've ever fully been able to put in order. I know I went back through the pantry door into the kitchen. I know I looked at my son and I said something. I don't remember exactly what I said because there was a noise in my head like rushing water. I know his face did something I had never seen it do before. Not guilt this time, something closer to shame, raw and open. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me and I looked at him. And between us was something that had been building for a long time and now had arrived. I asked him for the key to that lock. He took it off a hook near the back door. I went back to the garage. I opened that door. Lily was sitting on a rolled up sleeping bag in the corner of the storage room. She had a blanket around her shoulders. There was a plastic cup of water on the floor beside her and an empty sleeve of crackers. The room was about the size of a large closet. It had a single bulb overhead burned out. The light coming in was from the crack under the door and from the garage fluorescents I'd turned on. She squinted when the light changed. She was wearing socks but no shoes. She had a bruise on her left forearm, old enough to be yellowing at the edges. I picked her up. She weighed nothing. She put her arms around my neck, and she didn't say anything. She just held on. I went inside. I sat down on the kitchen floor with Lily in my lap. I don't know why the floor or my legs just stopped working properly, and that's where I ended up. Danny came into the kitchen from the living room, and when he saw his sister, he made a sound I don't have words for, some broken animal sound from an 8-year-old. And he sat down next to me on the linoleum and put his hand on Lily's foot. Philip stood by the counter. He put his face in his hands. I called 911. I want to say clearly I called immediately. I know in the old stories you hear, someone walks into something like this and they spend time confronting, arguing, deciding. I've heard people say they would have done things differently. I don't know what I would have done if I'd had the time to think. I didn't think. I pressed the 3 numbers and I told the dispatcher my granddaughter had been locked in a room and she was injured and I needed police and medical. Philip didn't try to stop me. He sat down on the kitchen floor across from me and he cried with his face in his hands and he didn't say a word. The paramedics were there in 11 minutes. The police were there in 9, which means they arrived first. I remember the officer. Young woman, couldn't have been much past 30. She looked at the storage room first, and then she looked at me sitting on the floor holding Lily, and she said, "Sir, you did the right thing calling." I don't know if I believed her at that moment. I kept thinking about all the Sundays I stayed home because Loretta said not to come yet. Loretta came home while the police were still there. I didn't see her arrive. I was with Lily in the ambulance by then. I heard later from the officer who took my statement that Loretta had first tried to explain it as a safety measure, that Lily had a behavior issue, that the room wasn't punitive, that she'd been fed. The officer who interviewed her later told me, off the record, that Loretta was one of the calmest people she'd ever seen in that situation, and that it was the calmest that made it worse, not better. Lily spent 2 nights in the hospital. The bruise on her forearm was from a fall. The doctor said, possibly not. There were 2 older marks, faded, on her right shoulder blade. The pediatric specialist said they were consistent with gripping. Hard, sustained gripping. The pediatric specialist said she was malnourished. Not severely, but meaningfully. She'd lost weight since her last recorded checkup 8 months prior. She was 6 years old. The district attorney's office filed charges against Loretta within the week. False imprisonment of a minor, child endangerment. The physical evidence, the bruising, the weight loss, the lock on that door, supported additional charges that came later. Philip cooperated. That's what his lawyer called it, cooperating. I call it something harder to name. He knew. I don't know for how long. I don't know in what way he told himself it was something else, but he knew and he said nothing. He told investigators that Loretta had started the punishment room, her phrase, punishment room, out of 4 months earlier. That Lily had what Loretta called defiance issues. That Loretta managed it. That Philip had been told not to interfere with Loretta's parenting methods. He said it out loud to investigators. That he'd been told not to interfere. My son, who I raised to say something, who I raised to be the voice when someone smaller couldn't speak. He was not charged. The DA determined he didn't meet the threshold for criminal neglect under the statute, though I've since read that determination varies enormously by state and by prosecutor. Some people told me he should have been charged. Some people told me he should have been charged. Some people told me the system worked. I don't have an opinion I'm willing to put in words yet about my son. That's between him and whatever he does with the rest of his life. Loretta was convicted 16 months after the arrest. The trial took 9 days. She had a good attorney who argued that the lock was for Lily's own safety, that she had previously escaped the house at night and put herself in danger. The jury didn't buy it. Loretta received 11 years. The judge said during sentencing that the photographs of that storage room and the testimony of the first officers on scene left him with no doubt about the nature of what had occurred. Danny now lives with me. Philip lost custody, not officially through a court order in those early months, but practically when his lawyer advised him it was the right move while the investigation was ongoing. Danny came to me with 3 bags and his backpack the week after Lily's hospitalization. He slept for about 13 hours the first night, and when he woke up, he ate 2 bowls of cereal and asked if he could stay for a while. I said yes. I said he could stay for as long as he needed. He said okay, and he went and turned on the TV in the living room like it was any other morning. He's still here. It's been 14 months. He started at the elementary school 4 blocks away, and he made a friend named Oscar who comes over after school sometimes, and they do the same things 8-year-old boys have always done: argue about video games, throw a ball in the backyard, eat everything in the refrigerator. On the outside, you might not know. Lily is in a therapeutic foster placement about 40 miles from me. I see her every other weekend, supervised, while the formal custody evaluation is ongoing. She is doing better. That's what the caseworker says, and I believe her because I've seen it. Lily will sit in my lap now without gripping quite so hard. She laughs more easily. Last month, she showed me a drawing she'd made at school, a house with a yellow sun and a dog in the yard, and she said she wanted a dog someday. I said someday we'd get one. I want to tell you something about that Saturday, about the moment I stood in the garage and heard a small cough from behind a locked door. I almost didn't go that day. I sat in my car in my driveway for about 15 minutes arguing with myself. I told myself it was Loretta's house, and if she wanted Sunday, Sunday was reasonable. I told myself I was old and I was tired, and I always made things more complicated than they needed to be. I had one hand on the steering wheel and I wasn't going anywhere. And then I thought about Danny's face when I'd walked in at Thanksgiving, how he'd looked at me, not the regular look, something else, a look that was asking something I didn't know how to read. I put the car in reverse and I went. I used to be the kind of person who doubted his instincts. 63 years of that. My ex-wife used to say I overthought everything and underacted on everything, and she wasn't wrong. But I'm telling you, if you feel something that you can't explain, not anxiety, not worry, but that specific weight that sits behind your sternum and doesn't move, don't talk yourself out of going. Don't wait for Sunday. Don't tell yourself you're overreacting, you're too old, you're too involved. You should respect boundaries. Go on Saturday. Get there early. Knock on the door. Lily told me the second visit after the hospital, when she was a little stronger, that she'd heard me pull into the driveway. She said she'd heard the car and she'd hoped it was me. She said she'd been hoping someone would come for a while. She said that in a way that a 6-year-old says things, matter of factly, without any drama, like it was just a thing that was true. She said, I kept hoping someone would come. That's the sentence I live with now. That's the one I turn over in the dark when I can't sleep. Not with guilt exactly, because guilt would mean I knew and did nothing. I didn't know, but with something adjacent to guilt. The understanding that the people we love can be suffering inside a locked room and we can be standing on the other side of the wall carrying a box of Christmas decorations and not hear a thing until one day, for whatever reason, we stop. We put the box down. We listen. One Saturday, I thought a lot about what kind of person ends up on the wrong side of a locked door. Not Lily. She didn't choose any of it. I mean the people standing on the other side. People like Philip, people like me in a different way, sitting in my driveway for 15 minutes arguing myself out of going. There's a thing that happens when we normalize discomfort slowly enough. It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like patience. It feels like respect. I told myself for years that keeping the peace with Loretta was the right thing, the mature thing, the thing a reasonable grandfather does. I stepped back every time she drew a line. I waited every time she said wait. And the whole time I was practicing patience, Lily was practicing survival. That's the part I sit with, not with anger at myself. I don't think guilt is useful beyond a certain point, and I'm past that point now. But with a clear-eyed understanding that restraint can be a virtue, and it can also be a failure, wearing virtue's clothing. Knowing the difference requires something I didn't always have. The willingness to be wrong in the direction of showing up, rather than wrong in the direction of staying home. Philip knew and said nothing. I've turned that over more times than I can count. He isn't a cruel man. I raised him and I know what he's made of, or what he was made of before Loretta slowly rearranged things. What happened to him is its own kind of story, how a person can be worn down, redefined, taught to call silence loyalty and call compliance love. I don't excuse it, but I understand the mechanism because I've seen it before in smaller ways in my own life. The voice that says, don't make this harder than it has to be. The The voice that says she knows best. The voice that says you're overreacting. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is fear with good posture. What I know now, and what I want to pass on to anyone who's listening, is that instinct is a form of intelligence, not the dramatic movie version instinct that tells you something is obviously wrong, the quiet kind. The kind that makes you sit in the driveway for 15 minutes because leaving feels wrong in a way you can't explain to a lawyer or a family court judge or even yourself. That feeling is real information. It took me 63 years to stop treating it like noise. Danny is doing well. He still doesn't talk much about what happened, and I don't push. Children process things on their own schedule, and the best thing an adult can do is make the house feel safe and keep the refrigerator full and show up at the school play. I do all three. Lily's getting better in ways that are slow and real. A little more laughter each visit, a little less flinching. That's not nothing. That's everything. Loretta made choices every day. For months, she made the same choice and then made it again. That's how character works. Not in the single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of every small decision. Hers added up to a locked door and a 6-year-old saying it's cold. Mine added up to a driveway, a 15-minute argument with myself, and a grandfather who finally put the car in reverse. I'm glad I went on Saturday. I'll be glad about that for the rest of my life.